Hello, my name's Kathy Thomas and I'm Head of School of Sport and Exercise Science. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm delighted to welcome Kelda Wood, former para-athlete and the head of the charity Climbing Out, which Kelda founded in 2010. Now I'm going to provide a very brief introduction because obviously we'd like Kelda to do most of the talking. So just to give you a few points, Kelda is a former GB para-canoeist. She's a dedicated athlete and has been able to adapt to various sports and physical challenges throughout her career. And she is the first para-rower to unbelievably row over 3,000 miles unsupported across the Atlantic. And her charity, Climbing Out, is focused on helping young people. So Kelda has obviously got a lot of very interesting things to talk to us about tonight. Her charity aims to build the confidence and self-esteem of young people who often find themselves in situation after life-changing injury, illness, or trauma. So obviously a very important charity working for a very good cause. Kelda has accomplished inspirational sporting and athletic achievements, but it's her concern she has for young people and her charitable work that I think is sort of quite poignant as well. And what she's definitely gone above and beyond to support and raise awareness for individuals going through trauma. And you know, to state this is actually an understatement. So Kelda raised money by rowing the Atlantic. She completed this alone in a small boat, and this obviously demonstrates resilience, strength of character, and unparalleled empathy to other humans. She embraced sport and exercise science to support her rowing mission, and this was supported by my colleagues in the School of Sport and Exercise Science, and I have it on good authority from my staff that she's not only highly dedicated to achieve her goals, but one of the nicest athletes they have ever worked with. So you will have the opportunity to ask Kelda some questions. You can put these in the chat and Kelda will answer them after her talk. And so from what I know of Kelda, this talk will be interesting and enlightening. And rather than me continuing to talk, Kelda, over to you.
Thank you very much, Kathy. And I'm sitting here blushing slightly because I feel like I need to manage expectations somewhat. But yeah, I hope I can live up to that introduction now. So I was first introduced to Lincoln University in 2018 in my lead up to the solo row of the Atlantic. So this is really a great opportunity to kind of connect back up with you guys and to tell you the story behind the row, where it all started from, and really how everything changed after my life-changing injury back in 2002. So I guess to start back at the beginning, from a very young age, my life always revolved around sport. It was who I was, it was the person I wanted to be. I loved any sport. I played netball at a national level, but my real passion lay with horses. My dream was to represent my country and to ride at the Olympics. So much so that when I was just 8 years old, I painted the Olympic rings on my bedroom wall. And when I used to walk my dogs, I would go and stand on the top of the stile at the side of a gate and pretend I'd just been presented with my gold medal and sing the national anthem. That was how much I wanted it. I guess I kind of had a slight technical hitch from the beginning because I didn't come from a wealthy family. They weren't into horses themselves. So I didn't even own a horse initially. My parents were very academic. They just wanted me to go out and get my GCSEs and my A-levels. So they offered me a bit of bribery that if I got 9 A's, they would get me a horse. I didn't get 9 A's. I did manage to get one, but They'd also agreed that for every A I didn't get, I could put £50 towards the horse. So eventually, after doing my GCSEs, I got my first horse. But for anyone who knows anything about horses, I'd actually managed to save up £750. But that's not a lot of money to be able to buy a horse that you hope is going to take you to the Olympics. So the only horse that I could afford was a horse that was 17.2, which means it was huge. It was unbroken, which means it had never been ridden before. And it was a thoroughbred, which means it was pretty feisty. But I really did dedicate the next 4 years working with this horse, and we started to form the partnership that looked like it might take me where I dreamt of going. I rode him in my first international, and things were looking really good. Until one morning, I was out exercising, and my horse shied at a plastic bag in a hedge, and he spooked out into the middle of the road. And unfortunately, there was a lorry coming past us who was going too fast to stop. Both myself and the horse were hit by the lorry, and sadly my horse was killed and I was fairly badly injured. Now that was my first major challenge, I guess, to overcome, but I picked myself back up. I couldn't just go out and buy another horse because I had no money left, but I got into racing and I started jump racing. And things went really well for quite some time. I rode a few winners, trained a few winners, and things seemed to be back on track. But then another little setback happened, because one morning when I was out exercising, and I'd come back in and was feeding the horses, and a bale of haylage that weighs about a ton, it's a big square bale, fell off the top of the stack and crushed me underneath. And that caused the injury to my leg that really was going to change the rest of my life. So the bale landed clean on the top of my head and compressed my whole body, causing a compound fracture and dislocation to my left ankle. To put that in layman's terms, and I hope none of you are eating your tea now, but it basically means that my foot was on right angles to my leg. The joint was sticking out the side, but then the weight of the bale shattered the bottom of my leg. So I had a fairly intensive period of physio and surgery. For a while, it looked like I was going to lose my leg. And I often say, sometimes I wonder if it would be easier if I had, because one of the biggest challenges I found that I faced was that people couldn't see my injury. So I couldn't run anymore. But because people couldn't see why, I felt like they were making judgment. I felt like they thought I was being lazy or unathletic or unmotivated. And that had a huge impact on me, because it was everything I wasn't. And so I found it was actually the mental impact of my injury that had a far bigger challenge for me than the physical impact. And I got a bit stuck in that place for the best part of 10 years, really. I always say I wasn't unhappy. I just wasn't happy with who I was. I'd lost my sport, and that left me feeling really, really empty. So in 2010, I recognised I needed a challenge. I knew I needed to do something about it. So I decided to climb Kilimanjaro. Now, the trip didn't really go as I planned. We summited, but I still felt like everyone was laughing at me for falling over and cursing me for going slowly and holding them up. But actually what happened was that after we'd summited, so many people came up to me and said how much it had inspired them to keep going, that they thought if I could do it with one gammy leg, they could sure as hell do it with two good ones. And I had a real light bulb moment when I was up Kilimanjaro, because I realised I needed to start changing my attitude, and I needed to start focusing on what I could do with my leg rather than what I couldn't. So when I came back, sorry, that's my dog just joining in the evening. When I came back, I began retraining as an outdoor instructor. And in getting involved in the outdoor world, firstly, it started to give me some confidence back. But what it did more than anything is it made me realise that there were an awful lot of other people out there who were really stuck after a life-changing injury, illness or trauma. And that led me to set up the charity Climbing Out that Kathy was talking about. So Climbing Out runs 5-day outdoor activity programs aimed at rebuilding confidence, self-esteem and motivation in people who've been through mental and physical trauma. We've been running for 10 years now, and we've achieved some incredible results with over 350 young people coming through our programs so far. So on the programs, we do far more than just outdoor activities. So we combine outdoor activities, including canoeing, kayaking, hill walking, caving, abseiling, climbing, anything we can do out in the outdoors that brings all the benefits of the outdoors, from teamwork, camaraderie, stretching boundaries, pushing comfort zones. But most importantly, it brings people together and it makes them realise they can do more than they thought possible. But we also bring in a really big layer that's around mental resilience and personal development coaching. So the best way I can describe it is what I learned through my own journey was that if you think of mental well-being and mental resilience being like a table, and your mental resilience and your mental strength is that tabletop, well, that tabletop needs table legs to hold it up if it's going to work. Now, no one told me what those table legs were, and I really wish they had, because that would have really helped me in my journey. And so through my own experiences, we really put together these table legs. And so as part of the programme, we combine the outdoor activities with sharing these table legs, but really realising that everyone's table legs are different. So it's about having a toolbox of table legs that different table legs can be got out for different situations or for different people. And that really is starting to change lives. And this testimonial for me says it all. It was a testimonial from one young person a couple of years ago. Thank you for pressing my play button and taking my life off hold. That's really everything that Climbing Out is about. Helping people accept the past, press the play button and start to move forwards. So I do want to put a bit of a shout out to all of you tonight as well, because one of our biggest challenges is reaching young people. So a lot of the time, because of the nature of the young people we work with, they often lack the confidence to come on a programme. But a lot of people also think that it's maybe not relevant to them, that, you know, my injury or what I've been through isn't serious enough. But I look at it differently, because I kind of say, you might have just broken your finger, but if your dream is to be an international guitar player, then breaking your finger can change your life. So I'd ask you if you yourself are facing any kind of challenges, or if you know anyone else, please do get in touch, because we're always keen to hear from anyone that would benefit from coming on a programme. And while Climbing Out was still developing and progressing, my own journey was continuing too. In 2014, I was selected as a member of the GB Paracanoe squad, aiming for the Paralympics in 2016. Now, this photo was taken at the World Championships in 2016. And if I take you back to that kid stood on the stile singing the national anthem, this was a really, really proud moment to be representing my country with Kelda Wood and the GB flag on my boat. That was something so, so special. The fact that it was in a boat and not on a horse, and as a para-athlete instead of an able-bodied athlete, well, maybe that was just how it was meant to be. I just hadn't realised that when I was younger. So having completed the World Championships, my eyes were firmly set on Rio. I truly believed I was destined to be a Paralympian, and I was destined to be a gold medal winner. This photo was taken at the Paralympic training camp out in Rio, and this was the regatta where all the Paralympic and Olympic races took place. I was within touching distance of that Paralympic dream. But unfortunately, as I'm sure a lot of you know, sport isn't a fairy tale. You don't always get the outcome that you dream of. And that was what happened here, because at the final selection regatta, with only one place available for Rio, I was beaten by 1.5 seconds. Now, that meant I wasn't going. As soon as another boat crossed the line in front of me, that was my Olympic dream completely over. And that was a really tough time. And I guess I knew I had a choice then, that I could either roll over and give up, or I could pick myself up and brush myself off and try and move on to the next challenge. But that was really hard because for quite a while I felt stuck. I didn't know what was next. I had no motivation. It kind of made me question everything that had happened since my injury. But it was also the time that I learned to trust in my own journey, because fairly shortly after not being selected for Rio, I was introduced to a guy called Martin Hewitt. Now, Martin is the founder of an organisation called the Adaptive Grand Slam. And the Adaptive Grand Slam were attempting to be the first disabled team to do the Mountaineering Grand Slam, which is the 7 highest peaks in the 7 continents, plus the North Pole and the South Pole. And 10 days after speaking to Martin, I found myself out in the Alps, training for what was going to be an attempt to climb Aconcagua, which is the highest mountain in South America at 7,000 meters. Now, I have to say, the training out in the Alps didn't go well. We did 2 mountains out there, Grand Tet and Gran Paradiso, which is the highest mountain in the Italian Alps. But my leg was a real problem. On both mountains, I'd ended up non-weight bearing and in a huge amount of pain. But fair play to Martin, we all need people that will give us a chance, and Martin gave me a chance. So he said he was more than happy to give me a shot at Aconcagua, but I had to work out how I was going to make it possible to do it with my leg in the way that it was. And that was when I really started to introduce my motto. And that motto is, it's not about saying I can't, it's about saying, how can I? Because what I found was when you start saying, how can I, there is always an answer. So I looked at Aconcagua and I said, how can I make it possible to climb a mountain like this with a leg like mine? Now, it wasn't a straightforward answer. I tried lots of things that didn't work. But eventually, by keep asking that question, I found some crutches that were very funky and spangly, as you can see. So these were specially adaptive crutches that were a special shape, so I could use them going uphill as well as downhill. They were a special material that would stand sub-zero temperatures. They had ice screws and snow baskets on the bottom that you can see. And we had a few other little adaptations to them that just made it feasible to use them when you were trying to use an ice axe and other bits of equipment that I needed to use out on Aconcagua. And so I turned up at the airport very excited about the difference that these crutches were going to make. And before I knew it, we were out in South America and out on Aconcagua. But what I realised as we started to climb was that it wasn't just going to be the crutches that were going to make the difference. It was also about my attitude. So I had a deal with myself before we started. I promised myself I wasn't going to let anything stop me that was within my control. The only thing I was going to let stop me get to the summit was the weather or altitude. But I also had a deal with myself that I wasn't going to whinge, I wasn't going to moan, I wasn't going to be the weak link in the expedition. I'd got into a habit in the early days of my injury of really seeing myself as a victim. And every time something bad happened, I would kind of go, why me? It's so unfair. But that actually wasn't getting me good results. And I knew that on this expedition, I had to have a different attitude. I was also the only female in the expedition and the only non-military on the expedition. So I had a point to prove. I knew that I couldn't be the one that turned into that needy female. I didn't want to be a needy female either. And with that attitude and with the help of my crutches, on the 17th of January 2017, I summited Aconcagua. Now, I have to say, the moment I stepped foot onto the summit, I found a peace and contentment in the person that I was with my injury. I suddenly realised that I didn't need to keep chasing after who I used to be, who I was before my injury. I could be happy how I was right now. I also realised I didn't need a golden medal around my neck to define success, to be the person I wanted to be. I realised that that was about my attitude. And so after summiting, I felt so lucky and so privileged to have found those answers. I knew that I wanted to do something even bigger. Firstly, to give myself the ultimate challenge, but also to try and inspire others to go on their journey and find their answers. Because I truly believe we can't find the answers for people. We can't give people their answers. They have to find them themselves. That's the only time they'll be the right answer. But what we can do is encourage and support and motivate people to keep moving and to go on that journey so they find their answers, hopefully a bit quicker than I did. It took me 15 years and that was way too long. And when I came back from South America, I very quickly made the decision that that next big challenge was going to be a solo row of the Atlantic. So that was 3,000 miles from east to west, rowing from La Gomera in Tenerife over to Antigua in the Canaries. Now, I guess the first thing I should say is that I had absolutely no burning desire to row the ocean at all. I'd never done any rowing. I'd never done anything out on the sea. And I sure as hell didn't like the idea of doing it on my own. But that was why I had to do it. Because to do something that I was going to enjoy, to do something that was going to be a pleasure and fun to do, well, I would have gone and climbed another mountain because I'd have loved that. But that wasn't what we were trying to put across with the row. It wasn't the message we were trying to send. It was really about trying to inspire and motivate people to get through tough times and keep going. And that was why I had to do something that was putting me so far out my comfort zone. I wasn't even sure I could do it. And in the 2 years leading up to the row, it was the most incredible journey where I met some amazing, amazing people. And it was in that lead up to the row that I was also introduced to Frankie Malloy from the Sport and Exercise Science department. So one of my big challenges was adapting the boat around my leg. It was back to that how can I attitude, because my ankle joint doesn't move. So if you think a normal rowing technique needs you to compress and extend that ankle joint. So the department really kindly got me in, and as you can see here, fitted me out with all kinds of electrodes, got me on the rowing machine and took a load of detailed patterns looking at how we needed to adapt the footplate to accommodate my injury. And so in combination with the university and a couple of boat builders and another exercise guy who had a real experience in adapting rowing footplates and boats, we put together a pivoting footplate. So the whole idea was that as my ankle couldn't move, that as I slid forward, the footplate would pivot, and as I pushed back, the footplate would pivot back. That meant the footplate was doing the movement for my ankle. We also had to just fix a rope from the footplate to my seat to stop the seat from sliding too far back and forcing my foot into overextension. Now that meant I had problem steering, and it meant that I lost quite a bit of power on each stroke, but that was the only way it was going to be possible for me to row the Atlantic with a leg like mine. So I had to suck that bit up and just appreciate that it was probably going to take me a little bit longer. Now, it was an incredible journey leading up to the row, but it was also pretty overwhelming. As I said before, I had no experience of rowing and no experience of the sea. And at times I really questioned why I was doing it and if I could do it. And as it got closer to the start of the row, I really started to feel quite trapped. I felt like I couldn't do it, but I also felt like I couldn't not. And that really kind of built as I got out in La Gomera. We had 2 weeks preparation leading up to the race start. And I kept on waiting for that something to happen that would mean I didn't actually have to do this. But before I knew it, it was race start day and it still hadn't happened. And as my feet were walking down the jetty towards my boat, I really felt like they should be walking in the other direction. And at one point, I even considered jumping on the ferry and just running away. I kind of thought, if I just jumped on the ferry and sailed back to Tenerife, no one would know any different, and I could just get out of this whole thing. But then I had to remember why I was doing it. Because each day I was on the ocean, I was rowing for a different young person. So each young person had been through some kind of mental or physical trauma, and each person had written and shared their story through our social media and the website. So every day I was out on the ocean, we were sharing one of those stories. And that was what motivated me to get in the boat. That was what motivated me to start, because I really realized, what kind of example would I be to these guys if I ran away? They've got no choice in dealing what they've been through, whether it be cancer or even in this photo, you can see there was one guy who was stabbed when he went to try and help someone else who was being attacked. The girl on the crutches was at the Manchester Arena bombing. They just have to deal with what they've been through. So how could I ever expect them to listen to me if I wasn't prepared to see it through myself? And so I got in the boat, and before I knew it, I was crossing that start line and rowing out into the Atlantic. And I have to say, at that point, it felt completely overwhelming. The thought of having another 3,000 miles ahead of me and 10 to 12 weeks out there on my own felt impossible. I really did feel like I couldn't do it, but I also knew that I couldn't not. You know, everyone was watching me. I had far too much pride to not have the balls to get in that boat and start rowing. And that feeling really did continue over the first couple of weeks of the row. I really struggled in those first 2 weeks. I felt so uncomfortable. The solitude really hit me. And I absolutely didn't think I could stick it out for another 10 to 12 weeks. So much so that I actually considered how I could break a bone so that I would have to be rescued. I knew that I had way too much pride to quit. I couldn't quit, but I just couldn't see how I was going to keep going either. And I thought my only answer was to break a bone and be rescued. Now, luckily, I wasn't brave enough to do that either. And what I found was, after those 2 weeks, I started to get into a routine. And what I found was, by just following that routine every single day with absolute discipline, slowly the days began to tick away. And before I knew it, I was 3 weeks in and 4 weeks in. And suddenly I started to believe that maybe I could do this. But as I said, the solitude was one of the hardest parts for me. I kind of realized on day 2 that I really liked people. And when I didn't have people around me, I struggled with my own attitude, really. I got a really bad attitude out there, and I desperately wanted to try and get back that same kind of attitude I'd had on Aconcagua. But what I found was, when I was on my own and I didn't have people around me, that was really hard to get that attitude back. But I wasn't always on my own. On Christmas Day, I was joined by Santa Claus. And then on the other side of the screen, you can see my 2 friends, which were MP and Hardy. So I don't know how many of you will remember Castaway with Tom Hanks, but those 2 were really my Wilsons of the Atlantic. So we had lots of very intimate conversations out there, I can promise you. But I was also lucky enough to have some real life company too, because I was actually joined by a minke whale who stayed with me for just over 48 hours, which is pretty much unheard of out there. Now I managed to catch this brief clip of him when he was out there with me. He doesn't show his face for very long, so make sure you don't blink when I show it. This morning there was flash lightning, pitch black, flash lightning, and I had a whale swimming along at the end of my... Oh, there he is! I hope you got that. So that's Herbie the whale. I promised him I'd give him a name if he stayed with me for over 24 hours. So yeah, he was there for just over 48 hours. And although that was probably one of the most incredible experiences out in the Atlantic, he brought his challenges too, because on the first night, he actually started to become what I thought was quite threatening. He was getting so close to the boat to the point that I was actually knocking him with my oars. He was swimming underneath the boat and rolling on his back and lying there. And when you've got a 9-metre whale lying underneath a 7-metre boat, it gets a little bit worrying. So I rang Atlantic Campaigns, who were the race organisers, and I said, should I be worried? And they reassured me that no, it was fine. He probably just thought that my boat was another whale and was performing a mating ritual. That didn't give me a lot of confidence at the time in the middle of the Atlantic, I can promise you. But people often ask me what were the best and worst moments out there. Herbie was without doubt some of the best and worst moments out there. But there were some incredible times too. This photo was actually taken when I had a flyby from a French naval aircraft, which was absolutely insane out there. And I had another night when there was a localized electrical storm going on around me. And when I finished rowing for the evening, I turned all my nav lights off on the boat. And you will never get solitude anywhere like you do in the middle of the Atlantic on your own. And I just sat back and watched this crazy lightning storm going on 360 degrees around me. But it was a beautiful evening right where I was. And it was a truly, truly special moment. But there were also some pretty challenging moments and some pretty awful moments. One day all my satellite communications went down, and this meant I lost all contact with the outside world. So I was still getting weather reports daily. I was able to check in for any advice on anything that was going on the boat. When all my comms went down, that was a time when I felt so vulnerable, because suddenly I realised I was in the middle of the Atlantic with no means of asking for help, getting any guidance, getting any weather reports, or just talking to someone when I was having a bad day. That was a moment that I really struggled with. But again, I actually had to apply a bit of how can I attitude, and I managed to fix one of the phones. I didn't get the others working, but as long as I had one, I managed to stay in communication with people. I had another day when I was stuck in another storm, and I had a knockdown on the boat, which is where the boat goes 90 degrees into the water. So I fell into the sea, all my stuff in the boat fell into the sea. But the boats are incredible at self-righting, and before you know it, it's kind of self-righted itself, and you've sort of plopped everything back in, and after you bail all the water out your boat, you just pick up the oars and keep rowing. And sometimes it's very difficult to row. There was one day that I was caught in another storm, and I'd rowed for about 8 hours and only made 2 miles. And when I stopped for a cup of coffee and just to grab a bite to eat, in that 15 minutes, I actually got blown 3 miles backwards. That was a fairly disheartening day. And those were the days where you did wonder if you would ever get to Antigua. But I knew through all of those challenging moments, the only way it was going to end and the only way I was going to get to Antigua was to keep rowing. And I really didn't have a lot of choice. Quitting just isn't an option. Or so I thought, anyway. Because I got to day 71. I was about 5 days away from Antigua, and I got caught in another weather system. And my boat was being blown too far south, and I got a call to say that it looked like I was going to miss the island and that I had to start making some serious north if I was going to hit Antigua. Now, that sounds quite simple. Well, make north then, Kelda. But when you've got the wind and the waves pushing you south, as a solo rower, that's a really hard thing to do. So I spent 5 days knowing that I was going to have to fight the wind like I'd never fought the wind before. And I guess the reason I tell you this story isn't to try and make it sound melodramatic, isn't to make me out to be a hero. It's far from it. It's actually to show how unstrong, if that's such a word, I was out there, you know, how much self-doubt I had. Because with 5 days to go, I asked to quit. Because what had happened was when I got caught in this weather system, my ETA, my arrival time, kept on being pushed out. They kept on saying, right, you're going to be in by Wednesday, your flight home Saturday. And then it was, oh, you're not going to make that anymore, Kelda. Your ETA is now Sunday, your flight home's Tuesday. Oh, you're not going to make that anymore, Kelda. And that really, I've really struggled with that. I just needed to know that this was going to end. So what I said to them was, I'm going to row my backside off for the next 5 days. But if I'm not in 5 days' time, I want you to come and tow me in. I'm done with this. I need to know it's going to stop. And I felt I was at peace with that message in quitting, because I felt like that sometimes the key thing to say was that it's okay not to succeed as long as you've given it your best. And I felt that I'd really given it my best. So it was kind of okay to say, don't be afraid of failing. Like, don't not do something because you're afraid of failing. I've given this my best. I haven't managed it, but I've absolutely given it the best shot I can. But I guess my learning from this is so often when we think we're done, we're actually not. So often when we think we've got nothing left, we can find a little bit more. Because I did row my backside off for the next 5 days, and it actually looked like I was going to get in. My ETA was Wednesday morning, and it was looking really good to get in for that Wednesday. So things really picked up again. But in the last mile and a half, the sea still wasn't done with me. I've been rowing for about a solid 24 hours. I'd had 2 20-minute breaks in the last 24 hours, just because I didn't dare come off the oars, because as soon as I did, the wind was pushing me south again. But with a mile and a half to go, I got a call to say, you're still too far south, you're going to miss the finish line. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't think I had anything else left to give. I was so tired. I'd been rowing so hard, and I just didn't know what else to do. But at that point, I have to say, I got that Aconcagua attitude back. And I suddenly realised that I wasn't going to have rowed for 76 days to be beaten in the last mile and a half. It was 3,543 miles that I'd rowed by that point. And so I pulled my rudder hard round. I got both arms on one oar, and I pulled so hard. I had tears running down my face. I was shouting in frustration as I pulled on those oars. And somehow, and I still don't quite know how, but me and Storm Petrel, my boat, we scraped over the finish line, literally with inches to spare. And I always feel when I say about crossing the finish line that it should be this great big kind of whoop whoop moment and a big celebration. But I have to say, it was just complete and utter relief. When I crossed the finish line, I just slumped over the oars and cried. I just couldn't quite believe that we'd got there. But then as I rowed into the harbour, English harbour in Antigua, I have to say the welcome I got more than made up for that, because this is the moment that I arrived.
Celebrations fit for a champion. Kelda Wood makes history as a new Queen of the Ocean. First the smiles, then the tears, as she's embraced by her sister who's travelled from South Tyneside to meet her.
Now that might have looked like a glory moment. I promise you it was far from it. The brave one was actually my sister, because having not had a shower for 76 days, I absolutely stunk. So the fact that she was prepared to give me a hug, she was the one who deserved the cheers. But it was actually a really, really personal moment, because I've been very open about my weaknesses, about my self-doubt, about my vulnerabilities out there. And I really hope that it was that would inspire people, not the 3,000 miles, not the flares, not the big cheers. I really hope that it would inspire people to realise that if we acknowledge that it's okay to find things tough, it's okay to have weaknesses, it's okay to be a bit of an idiot sometimes, but that doesn't mean we can't do things. And what I really wanted was that moment would inspire people to go, okay, it doesn't matter if I'm not sure if I can. It doesn't matter if I've got self-doubt. What can I do anyway? And I guess the whole point in me sharing with you my story, in particular, the time on the Atlantic, is to really share the big learning that I've taken from all of this. And that's that it's okay to think you can't do something. But just because you think that doesn't mean you can't do it, and doesn't mean you won't do it. And, you know, sometimes it's okay to be negative. I was really negative out on the Atlantic. But the key is not to get stuck there for too long. And that can be hard. COVID is a prime example of that. I don't think there's a single person could say that they haven't found lockdown and all the restrictions hard. And I guess for you guys at uni, more than anyone, you know, you go to uni to have the time of your life and go out and socialise and have fun. And I'm guessing it kind of sucks when you haven't been able to get out there and do that. But to finish, I'd like to just share with you a quote that I heard a while back that really makes sense of it for me. It's from a guy called David Goggins. And he says, doing things that make you uncomfortable help make you strong. The more time you spend being uncomfortable, the stronger you become. Now, what I really realised is that it's good to feel uncomfortable. It's good to feel challenged, because that's when you get stronger. And the stronger you become, the more opportunities open up, and the more you can get out there and achieve. So if I could leave you with one thing from tonight, is think of what you really want to do. And for every reason that you're telling yourself you can't or you shouldn't, get out there and do it anyway. So have fun, enjoy, and do you know what? Most importantly, keep moving. And I hope that's been of interest to you all tonight, and maybe kind of made a bit of sense, especially in the situation we're all in. And yeah, if there's any questions from anyone, please feel free to fire away.
Thank you so much, Kelda, for your inspirational story. And, you know, I actually found it quite emotional listening to your story and your journey with you. So, you know, I really appreciate you being so frank and honest with us. There's some really great questions that have come in. So we're happy to answer a few. There's a query here. We can't get rid of that COVID word, but how has COVID affected your charity work?
You know what? It's a great question. Is that a really bad echo there?
It's fine. We can still hear you.
Okay, that's all right. Yeah, so we obviously haven't been able to run our 5-day programs. We managed to run one back in August that we ran as a COVID adapted program with social distancing, screening, temperature checks. But then the increase in restrictions stopped that. But we really have approached this year with the how can I approach again. So we've looked at how can we still deliver those table legs even when we can't run our 5-day programs. So we've developed a series of online workshops that we've been delivering to a number of organisations. We've been running walk and talk days, which are just single days where we can keep them socially distanced. And actually the charity has grown and become stronger through COVID. And I really see that COVID is a time when it is kind of almost sorted out the men from the boys, because whether it be businesses or charities, I did some work with the GB swimming squad, and they were saying about how, we can't get in the pool and we haven't been able to train properly. Every athlete aiming for Tokyo this year is in the same boat. So are you going to be the athlete that uses COVID as an excuse, or are you going to be the athlete that uses COVID to grow and adapt and be a better athlete next year? And I think as a charity, we've absolutely done that. But it's a great kind of ethos for everyone going through COVID. Not easy. I'm not saying for a second it is, but the first step is trying to take control of what you can and do that.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for that. Another question, I'm quite curious about the answer to this. Have you got any plans for any other challenges? I can't believe that you would have, but then having looked at your journey, it would surprise me if you don't. So, have you got any plans for the future?
Yeah, it's another really interesting question, because when I first came back, one of the first questions everyone seemed to ask me was, what next? And I actually was ready to thump them, because I was like, blimey, is rowing the Atlantic not enough? And for quite a long time, I just wanted to settle down and focus on the charity. But actually what's happened recently, I've always wanted to do a triathlon, but I can't run. I have trouble riding a bike because of my leg, and swimming, front crawl, my legs tend to sink because of my injury. But my partner's recently nailed front crawl with me. So I was like, okay, if I can swim, if I could start to find some triathlons that would let me do the run in a wheelchair, I can budge my way through the bike. Maybe I can do a triathlon. And it's actually turned into quite a project now. We've created a new project, started a new project called Creating Momentum, which is sort of documenting the triathlon journey, but it's also a place for other people to share what they're doing to overcome and adapt. Because I think it's the one thing about the Atlantic is, for a lot of people, that's quite unachievable. They wouldn't want to do it, first and foremost. But actually, someone to inspire or motivate them to go and do a half marathon or a park run, or to get in the pool and swim, or to get on a bike and bike, actually feels far more relatable. So I'm loving it now. It's literally just starting. The wheelchair arrived yesterday. I've just got some sponsorship for a bike, so a bike company are going to adapt a bike. And April the 25th is the first triathlon next year. So watch this space. It's going to be
fantastic. Fantastic. It sounds really great. What advice would you give to young people looking to start a charity or work in the sector?
God, that's a great question too. I think first and foremost, I would say believe in what you're doing. I had an absolute heart and passion about climbing out on what we were trying to achieve. And what I found was that because I had a complete belief in it, people bought into it. And so actually it was getting people involved at the beginning. I was a bit like a terrier with a bone, but it was that heart and passion that gave them the belief that it was worth getting involved with. The other thing is, don't expect it to happen overnight. We've been running 10 years. The first year we ran one program. The second year we ran two. The third year we ran four, but I had no blooming money to pay for it. And I ended up going at one stage, I've got no money, what can I do? And I did a swim in the pool. This was breaststroke because I couldn't do front crawl, but I did the equivalent to a channel swim. But it was literally just going, how can I raise the money to pay for this program? But you know what? Kind of last year was a turning point. And for a long time, I wanted it to happen instantly. It's never going to. You've got to build up your contacts, you've got to build up your reputation, you've got to build up your evidence and your outcomes. And when you do that, when you establish really good foundations, then you've got a charity that will survive and will grow. So believe in it and take your time are the two things I would say.
Thank you for that. I like this next question. So you shared your psychological journey with us about rowing the Atlantic, but how did you adjust psychologically once you're on land again?
Really easily. So I think, I'm a big believer in kind of mindset, and if you come back thinking you're going to have a problem adjusting, you probably will. I finished the row on the Wednesday morning. I flew back to the UK. I left Antigua on the Friday. I landed on the Saturday. Saturday night, I was sat on my parents' sofa watching Casualty, eating a Chinese, having just had a bath and about to go to sleep in a proper bed. And I didn't think anything of it, and it was absolutely crazy how you did. I just slotted straight back into normal life. The only thing was that was hard was actually I missed the simplicity of ocean life, which I can't even believe I'm saying that, but hating solitude too much, you do find that life was very, very simple. All you had to do was eat, sleep and row. That was it. No emails, no bills to pay, no shopping to get, no house to clean, no dogs to walk. Life was incredibly, incredibly straightforward. So I think that was the only thing. I'd find myself kind of daydreaming back to that ocean and just wishing I could have a bit more simplicity again. But I wouldn't do it again. So if anyone's asked that question, the answer is no, I wouldn't do it again.
Okay, thank you. You might have answered this question with the Chinese, the soft bed and a bath, but what home comforts did you miss when you were rowing?
Oh, excuse me. I actually didn't miss those sort of home comforts at all. I adjusted well to the I guess you're not sitting down to eat a nice evening meal on a Saturday night, chilling out, watching the telly, with your glass of red wine kind of thing. You were literally eating to fuel. So I just ate to fuel. I didn't miss my food, got very used to my makeshift bed, which isn't really a bed at all. The thing that I missed was my dogs. And that's the honest answer. My dogs are my constant companions, and walking my dogs is my place to, I get a huge amount of pleasure out of walking my dogs, and I miss their company, and I miss the colours and the sound of land. Out there, all you get is the grey blue of the ocean and the sky, the sun, and that's pretty much it. They're the only colours you get, and the only noise you get is the wind and the waves. And to come back to the greens and the browns and the birds was absolutely amazing. So that's not really what you call a home comfort, but that was what I missed 100%.
That's really interesting. This looks as if it's the last question. I think it's a good question to end on as well. So looking back at the row, is there anything you wish you'd known before starting?
Yeah. I think, I guess for me, it was more the learnings, so those learnings, worrying about the what ifs, it's wasted energy because you don't know that they're going to happen. Accepting that it's okay to feel negative, it's okay to struggle, it's okay to find it tough, knowing that just because I was thinking I wanted to quit didn't mean I was going to. There were huge learnings that I took from the row that I apply every day to life now, that I think if I'd known that beforehand, it probably would have saved an awful lot of heartache out there. So yeah, but otherwise it all went well.
It sounds it. Thank you ever so much for sharing your story. It's been really fascinating. And, you know, it's been great to hear about your journey and for you talking so frankly to us as well. So thank you for that. And, you know, I'm sure that I can say that on behalf of all the listeners as well. We have put on the at the bottom of the slide, there's information about Climbing Out. So if anybody wants to find any more about Kelda's charity, Climbing Out, the website, you're all there. So, you know, please have a look at that. And also, in case anyone's interested in any of the programs at the university or in the School of Sport and Exercise Science, we have an open day on the 16th of December, and we'd love you to come along to that. So thank you, Kelda, and we look forward to hearing about your triathlon.
Thank you. You take care.
Thank you.